Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The morning in Montana was so still that it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. On the rolling hills, mist drifted like smoke. Thin, pale, and cold enough to sting the spine. The first sunlight brushed the distant snow-capped peaks, spilling a faint gold hue over the Madison Valley. A land so quiet, so wild, and so breathtaking, it could stop a heartbeat. Barrett Maddox drove his silver Ford F-150 along the winding dirt road. Each tire crushed the wet gravel, leaving a trail of mud in its wake. He cracked open the window, letting the sharp air rush in, carrying the scent of burnt grass, pine resin, and damp soil, the raw, unmistakable smell of the American West. At 35, once hailed as a clean energy tech prodigy, Barrett had left Seattle after selling his startup for nearly $100 million. He hadn't gone broke, just burned out. After 10 years trapped in glass boardrooms and hollow growth charts, he wanted to build something real again. He had half-joked to a friend, "I want to see if technology can save the earth the way it once saved my bank account." So he bought a 300-acre ranch in Montana, so remote there was no cell service, only wind, grass, and silence. A regeneration project for the land and for himself. 4 months ago, the main house had been nothing but a decaying wooden frame, a leaking roof, stained walls, a dry well, and a collapsing barn. He'd hired a local crew to clean up, install solar panels, and left for Seattle to finalize the paperwork. Now, with autumn setting in, he'd returned, only to find everything changed. As he rounded the last bend, Barrett slammed the brakes. A thin column of smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the cold air before fading into the gray-blue sky. The wind carried the smell of toasted bread and freshly brewed coffee, so warm and alive it felt impossible in this desolate place. He frowned. That chimney was supposed to be cold. The power system wasn't even connected. No one was supposed to be here. Then he heard laughter, not a man's voice, a woman's, young, bright, alive, like music from a morning that didn't belong to him. Barrett cut the engine and stepped out. The mountain wind slapped his face, freezing and sharp, waking every sense. He looked up. The second-floor window was cracked open, a white curtain swaying. Under the porch, a few lavender pots bloomed violet, the soil freshly watered, dark and glistening. A row of tomato seedlings lined the fence. He tightened his grip on the keys. This wasn't just trespassing. It felt like someone had taken over the one place he thought belonged solely to him. He climbed the porch steps slowly. The wooden door was ajar, the smell of coffee mixed with warm butter and wood smoke. He pushed it open. The hinges gave a soft groan. Barrett froze. The old house was gone, or at least no longer the ruin he remembered. The walls were freshly painted. The wooden table gleamed. Hand-stitched quilts hung on the wall. The fireplace burned bright, its light flickering against pale curtains. Everything looked alive, warm, and unmistakably feminine. "Ruby, bring out more butter, quick." "Grace, Miss Violet's going to fix the tablecloth again." The voices came from the kitchen, followed by the opening of the door. A young woman with deep brown hair stepped out, holding a coffee pot. When she saw Barrett, she froze. Her gray eyes locked with his. And for that moment, the whole house fell silent. There were 4 women in the house. One gray-haired and small, but with sharp, disciplined eyes. One, blonde and cautious, dressed in a white shirt and khaki pants. Another, red-haired and the youngest, held a baby wrapped in a gray wool blanket, tired but gentle. And the one who had just stepped out, the dark-haired woman in a coarse shirt, coffee dust on her hands. There was something steady yet defiant about her, like someone used to making decisions in storms. Barrett spoke, his voice rough and restrained. "Who are you? Who gave you permission to be here?" The gray-haired woman set down the knife she'd been using to cut bread and replied calmly, "I'm Grace Shaw. We didn't mean to intrude. This house had been abandoned for months. We just needed shelter until we could find somewhere else." Barrett folded his arms, scanning the room. "Shelter? This is private property. I bought this place 4 months ago. I have the deed. I don't recall inviting anyone." And the young woman set down the coffee pot and stepped forward. Her voice was low and firm, but not trembling. If you want us to leave, we will. Just allow me time to pack. There's a child here. Barrett glanced at the red-haired girl holding the baby. The child slept peacefully, cheeks rosy, breathing soft, smelling faintly of milk. His anger softened. He looked around. Nothing was damaged. In fact, everything was cleaner, brighter, full of life. How long have you been here? 4 months, the dark-haired woman replied. He met her gaze. Those gray eyes didn't waver. And I should call you? Cora, she said, lifting her chin slightly. Cora Langley. Barrett nodded slowly. I'm Barrett Maddox, the new owner of this ranch. Cora's lips tightened. Then I suppose we have the same problem, Mr. Maddox. We both believe we were here first. Barrett gave a faint, incredulous smile. He wasn't sure if it was at her words or her composure. Maybe so, but at least I paid for it. And we paid in labor, she said quietly. If you need proof, just look around. He did, and realized she was right. The floors had been sanded, the well was restored, and the barn was repaired. Even young trees were taking root outside. Barrett exhaled, his voice softer. I'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow morning, we'll talk this through properly. Cora simply nodded. No fear, no pleading, just clear, level agreement, like two people negotiating rather than a landlord and a trespasser. Barrett stepped out onto the porch. The mountain wind swept past, cold and carrying the scent of grass. Far away, the sun dipped behind the Madison Range, laying gold light over the darkening fields. He stood there a long time, listening to the faint cry of the baby fade into a gentle lullaby inside. For the first time in months, Barrett wasn't thinking about stocks, profits, or markets. He just felt this place, its wind, its silence, its heartbeat. And somewhere deep down, he sensed that he, who thought he'd come here to start over, had only just stepped into a story that had begun long before he arrived. The next morning, the hills were still veiled in white mist. Barrett Maddox stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, looking through the window at the 4 women cleaning up after breakfast. They didn't speak to him, only gave a polite nod, as if to acknowledge the presence of their new landlord. He had planned to send them away. But then Ruby, the young mother holding her baby, looked at him with those eyes, and he couldn't do it. Just 1 month, Barrett said quietly. Once you find another place, you'll have to leave. Cora nodded calmly as though she had expected that answer. Thank you, Mr. Maddox. We won't be any trouble. And so they stayed. At first, Barrett kept his distance. He worked outside, fixing the water pump, rewiring old cables, avoiding the kitchen where women's laughter filled the mornings. But gradually he began to observe. Cora Langley, the woman he once thought was a trespasser, turned out to be the one who set the rhythm of the entire house. She rose before dawn, lit the stove, brewed coffee, checked the vegetable garden, then scribbled notes in a worn black notebook. Barrett once caught a glimpse of the cover. Samuel Langley case file. He asked her about it once, but she only replied softly, something personal. When the time comes, I'll tell you. By day, she was composed and steady, her eyes alert to every detail, as if she were always prepared to shoulder someone else's burden. At night, when the house was asleep, she sat under the dim lamp, writing, crossing things out, pasting old scraps of paper into the book. Documents Barrett couldn't quite understand, but his gut told him they were more than memories. Grace Shaw, the oldest, was the gentle soul of the house. She had once been a teacher in Bozeman. When she exposed the school principal for harassing students, she lost everything: her job, her reputation, her peace. No school would hire her again. I don't regret it, Grace said one afternoon as she taught the children their letters. But I've learned something. Sometimes, telling the truth is treated like a crime. Every evening, Barrett would see her teaching Ruby to read invoices, helping Violet with expense reports, and guiding little Emma to say "Mama" out loud. Violet McCall, on the other hand, carried herself like someone who once lived in power. Every movement was deliberate, polished, but beneath that calm exterior lay a quiet ache. She had been the chief accountant at her husband's company, a small firm that collapsed after he was investigated. To save himself, he blamed her. Violet lost everything: her reputation, her savings, her friends. Now she managed the finances of the haven. Her ledgers were immaculate. Every cent was accounted for, and every expense was documented. Barrett had to admit, if these women were squatters, they were the most disciplined ones he'd ever seen. And Ruby Callahan, the red-haired girl with spring-green eyes, always smiled gently, though fear lingered in her voice. She said she'd once been married to a wealthy businessman in Denver. When Emma was born, her husband grew suspicious because the baby didn't resemble him. He said I cheated. Tried to take the baby for a DNA test. I ran. No money, no lawyer, just a car and a child. Cora had met Ruby at a gas station off the highway, where the young mother was sleeping in her car during a winter storm. She brought them home, and that's how the haven began. Barrett slowly realized they weren't drifters. They were people the world had abandoned, who had decided to build their own world instead. He watched them plant vegetables, share every bit of food, mend torn blankets, and turn the weathered house into a place where warmth lived in every corner. In the mornings, lullabies blended with laughter. At night, they gathered around the dining table, eating, talking, joking as they cooked. Cora spoke little, but when she smiled, watching Ruby laugh or Grace teaching the kids, that rare, tender smile made something deep in Barrett ache. One evening, Barrett was fixing the lights outside the barn. He heard Grace's voice teaching the children a song, Violet reading her reports, Ruby giggling as Emma clapped her tiny hands. Amid all those sounds, he realized life had returned to a place that once felt lifeless. Cora stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a light shawl. "You're still up?" she asked. "I'm used to working late." He looked up. "You?" "I'm used to worrying about others later than that." They fell quiet. The mountain wind carried the scent of lavender and wood smoke. "I still don't get it," Barrett said. "Why do you help them?" "You don't have to." "Because no one helped me when I needed it," Cora answered softly. "So I became the person I once needed." He looked at her for a long time. Those gray eyes weren't just sad. They held something like faith, the kind he thought he'd lost. The haven, the name they joked about, which somehow became real, now had a small classroom, a green garden, and a clear well. They lived slowly but steadily, as if every crack in their lives was being mended by hands and kindness. Barrett never brought up leaving again. Instead, he quietly built new fences, repaired the roof, and bought more seeds. One morning, he stepped onto the porch, watching kitchen smoke curl upward, hearing Ruby hum to Emma, and Grace's laughter drift through the garden. The sunlight spilled gold across the roof, slipping through the window where Cora was writing. And for the first time since leaving Seattle, Barrett Maddox felt he belonged somewhere. Not because he owned the land, but because this place, somehow, had brought him back to life. Night in Montana was unnervingly quiet. Only the whisper of wind through the maples and the faint crackle of dying firewood broke the silence left from dinner. The moon hung over the Madison Range, silver light spilling across the cabin roof like a veil of mist. Inside the sleeping house, Cora Langley was still awake. Wrapped in a wool cardigan, she moved softly through the living room, where Barrett had left his laptop and a few blueprints scattered on the table. The solar desk lamp cast a tender glow across a photo of him with his engineering team. That light stopped her for a heartbeat. Then she moved on, down the narrow stairs leading to the old cellar, once just a farm storage room. The cellar door creaked faintly as it opened. Below, the air smelled of damp wood, rusted metal, and cold stone. Cora switched on her flashlight. The beam slid across the stone wall and piles of dusty boxes. In the far corner, behind a wooden shelf, sat a black iron box, rimmed with rust, its lock broken. She knelt and lifted the lid. A cloud of dust rose like ghostly smoke. Inside lay a thick bundle of documents bound with a leather cord, yellowed with age. On the cover, written in black ink, were the words, "Samuel Langley, Wickham Land Fraud Case." Cora's hand trembled as she touched the name. Her father, Judge Samuel Langley, had once been a symbol of integrity in Montana. He had launched an internal investigation into the Wickham Land Group, a powerful real estate conglomerate suspected of seizing public land and bribing state officials. Then one morning, as he prepared to deliver the evidence to federal prosecutors, his car went off a cliff. Police called it a brake failure accident, but Cora knew her father. a man obsessively careful. His brakes never failed. He had been killed for crossing men too powerful to confront. Cora sat on the cold floor and opened the files one by one. Old printed pages, signatures of state officials, lists of temporarily allocated properties, maps marked in red, outlining the center of the fraud scheme. When her flashlight swept across one faded map, her chest tightened. In the corner, nearly erased by time, she read the words, Section 24, Madison Valley Development Area. It was the same land where Barrett Maddox now lived. This ranch, the Haven, was the very heart of her father's unfinished case. Cora leaned back and closed her eyes. All her life, she had been running from her father's death, from anonymous threats, from the shadow crushing the Langley name. But fate had brought her back to the exact place where it all began. In her mind, she heard her father's voice again, low, steady, gentle. Justice doesn't die, Cora. It only sleeps, waiting for someone to wake it. She whispered into the dark, answering a ghost. I'm standing on their land, Father. And I'll see this through to the end. A faint sound at the stairs made her freeze. She quickly folded the documents and shut the box. The flashlight beam wavered just as Barrett Maddox appeared on the steps, his jacket half draped, his face touched with sleep. Cora, he asked, voice rough, what are you doing down here at this hour? She turned, forcing her panic away. I was just checking for mice. I thought I heard something. I don't want them chewing through the wires. Barrett frowned. The light hit her face. Pale, but her eyes were steady, maybe too steady. He glanced around, noticing the closed iron box, a few papers peeking out. Mice? He repeated, skeptical. Cora stepped closer, lifting an old ledger, as if casually showing it. I've been recording expenses and supplies for the month. Thought I'd check the old storage items too. Would you like to see? Barrett studied her for a moment, then shook his head. No, I trust you. He turned toward the stairs, then paused. His voice softened. Cora, if you ever need help with anything, just say so. She smiled faintly. Thank you, Mr. Maddox. I'm used to handling things myself. He nodded once quietly and went back upstairs. The light from the staircase faded, leaving Cora alone in the cellar, the darkness closing in like a curtain over secrets. When the door shut, she exhaled shakily. Her hands trembled as she opened her black notebook and wrote, the ink wavering but firm, I'm standing on their land, Father, and I'll see this through to the end. The pen stopped. Ink smudged across the page. Outside, the Montana wind swept through the fields, whispering like restless souls. Cora closed the notebook, pressing it to her chest, her eyes lifting to the ceiling. Above her, the house slept. Above that, a man unknowingly woven into her secret. And in the cold breath of night, she knew her father's battle was not over. Morning at the Maddox Ranch began like any other, pale sunlight cutting through a thin veil of mist, Ruby humming softly as she rocked baby Emma to sleep, and the faint scent of fresh-baked biscuits drifting from the kitchen. But near noon, the hum of approaching engines broke the calm. Barrett was inspecting the irrigation system when a convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled up the dirt road leading to the hill. Dust billowed behind their tires, sunlight glinting off their chrome. In Montana, people only drove cars like that when they wanted to be seen. The first door opened. A silver-haired man in a pale gray suit stepped out, slow-moving but exuding arrogance. Harold Wickham, chairman of the Wickham Land Group, the very man who'd sold this property to Barrett 4 months ago. Behind him stood 2 assistants in black suits and a local police officer. Barrett narrowed his eyes, letting go of the water valve, and walked forward. Mr. Wickham, didn't expect to see you here. Wickham smiled, the kind of smile worn by men who think the board belongs to them. Nor did I expect to find this place so lively. I heard rumors of some unauthorized residence on my former land. Thought I'd take a look myself. His tone was soft, but every word carried frost. The way he said my land made Barrett's jaw tighten. This property is now legally mine. I have the papers, and no one here is trespassing. Wickham took a slow stroll, eyes scanning the ranch as if appraising it. New fences, a freshly painted roof, rows of vegetables growing in neat lines. You've done well, Maddox. Still, I heard a group of women lives here. Hard to imagine a tech entrepreneur running a charity farm. Barrett's voice stayed even. They work here. I hired them to help with restoration. Wickham chuckled lightly, his steely eyes narrowing. Oh, really? And in this day and age, people still work without contracts? Barrett didn't answer. He knew Wickham's style. Every word polite, every word a threat. At that moment, the front door opened. Cora Langley stepped onto the porch, soil still on her hands, hair tied back with a few loose strands. She hadn't meant to appear, but the noise had startled baby Emma, and she'd come out to calm Ruby. When Wickham saw her, the smile froze on his face. In an instant, his eyes shifted. Surprise, tension, then ice. You! Langley? Cora froze, heart pounding, but quickly composed herself. I think you've mistaken me for someone else, she said calmly. So calmly that even Barrett glanced at her in surprise. Wickham tilted his head, the crooked smile returning. Perhaps. Still, you look very much like someone I once knew. A stubborn old judge who liked sticking his nose where it didn't belong. Cora said nothing. Her gray eyes stayed locked on him. Silent, steady, and dangerous. The look made Wickham take an involuntary step back. Barrett stepped forward, voice firm. If you're here to discuss land, speak to my lawyer. Otherwise, I think this visit is over. Wickham glanced around the property, then back at him. You've got some nerve, Maddox. But Montana's a small place. Rumors travel faster than the wind. I just hope you're trusting the right people. He turned toward his car, but paused at the door, lowering his voice. Some people should never return to places they don't belong. The car door slammed, the convoy rolled away, leaving clouds of dust swirling in the wind. Barrett stood motionless for a long while, sunlight spreading across his shoulders. When he turned, Cora was still on the porch, her hand gripping the railing. You know him? He asked. She didn't look at him, her voice rough. I used to. A long time ago. He looked like he recognized you. Cora lifted her gaze. In her gray eyes, something rare flickered. Resolve and fear, both at once. He didn't come for the land, Barrett, she whispered. He came for me. Barrett frowned. For you? Why? Cora shook her head, her tone turning hard. I can't tell you. Not yet. She turned and walked back inside, leaving him on the sunlit porch. Barrett watched her go, a strange unease settling in. It felt as if the house itself had changed. Like the wood carried the scent of danger now. Far off, the dust from Wickham's convoy still hung above the road, merging with the pale Montana sky. And Barrett understood then, the peace of this valley was only the stillness before the storm, and that storm had just begun. The valley wind was wilder than usual that morning. Heavy clouds had blanketed the Montana sky since dawn, casting a silvery gray light over the hills, making the Maddox Ranch look like an old painting forgotten in the middle of a storm season. Cora sat alone in the small office behind the barn, once an old cellar from a previous owner. The concrete walls were stained with damp patches, the air thick with the scent of mildew and aged paper. But it was the only place where she could breathe. In front of her stood a gray steel cabinet, its lock rusted but still intact. Last night, while organizing tools, Barrett had casually told her, that cabinet's just full of old paperwork. But something in Cora's gut told her otherwise. She pried the lock open with an iron nail. The hinges screeched in protest. Inside, beneath piles of moldy documents, was a black external hard drive, the kind people from her father's generation used before cloud storage became common. On a faded label written in shaky blue ink were the words, Case 2087, Wickham Land Group. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it echo in her chest. Violet's old laptop, a relic from her accounting days, became the key to a buried past. The drive took its time booting up. The light blinked, then revealed a directory filled with hundreds of folders, organized by year, county, parcel map, transaction records, and dozens of files labeled evidence. Cora opened the first PDF. Pages of financial ledgers and land development maps appeared, signed with names, all forged. One name appeared repeatedly at the bottom of the documents, Harold Wickham. In the next files, she found internal memos, confidential meeting notes, and scanned documents showing that Wickham Land Group had purchased thousands of acres of public land through fake contracts, only to resell them to the government at 10 times the value. The proof was right there, the very evidence her father had uncovered, and maybe the reason he had died. Cora sat motionless, gripping the hard drive. Tears welled in her eyes but refused to fall. For 4 years, she had been running, living in the shadows, chasing this truth. And now that it sat before her, she didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. That afternoon, Barrett came home early. He found Cora wiping the kitchen table, though her movements were distracted, her gaze distant. He didn't ask, just watched quietly. Lately, she seemed different, more cautious, sleepless, alert to sounds he couldn't hear. That night, while checking the solar lights near the horse barn, Barrett noticed something strange. A tiny device, no larger than his thumb, tucked behind a wooden beam, blinking faintly red. He took it down, a miniature recorder with a transmitter. At that exact moment, a low humming sound cut through the sky. Barrett looked up. A drone flying low, fast, its blinking lights circling above the ranch like a mechanical eye. He ran back to the house and threw the device onto the table in front of Cora. "What is this?" She looked at it, then at him. Her gray eyes narrowed. "I knew it," she whispered. "They found me." "Who?" Barrett demanded. "Harold Wickham. He doesn't believe in accidents. He knows I've been looking for what my father left behind. And now, he's watching me." Cora told him everything. Her father's case, the land fraud, the cover-up, and the evidence she'd just uncovered in the cabinet. Barrett listened, his expression tense but no longer skeptical. "You have proof?" he asked. Cora nodded toward the hard drive. "Everything's in here. Maps, contracts, original images." Barrett was silent for a moment, then said firmly, "We can't keep it here. They'll come back. And next time, it won't just be a drone." Cora's voice trembled slightly. "I don't trust anyone, Barrett. Not the local authorities, not the police. But you can trust me." It was the first time his voice carried that kind of conviction. Not as an outsider, but as someone ready to step into her fight, no matter the cost. They sat side by side under the weak lamp, combing through the files, verifying each signature, each fake document. Cora's hands shook when she saw her father's name at the bottom of the final file. An unfinished note, evidence to be sent to federal office. Risk level high. Her breath caught, her voice broke. My father was going to send this to the FBI. He never got the chance. Barrett nodded. Then we'll finish what he started. The Montana night was pitch black. Only the laptop's glow lit their faces. Barrett backed up the data onto a new drive, while Cora drafted an email to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Division for Land Corruption. Before hitting send, she hesitated, her hand hovering above the keyboard. Barrett placed a steady hand on her shoulder. If he's watching, that means he's afraid. And if he's afraid, that means we're getting close. Cora nodded slightly. The email was sent. Outside, the wind howled across the roof. The drone disappeared beyond the ridge. Inside the small room, they sat in silence, unaware that from that very moment, the hunt had turned. And this time, justice was coming home. Time moved slowly in Montana. October passed in veils of white mornings and pale gold afternoons. The dry wind carried the scent of grass and earth, whispering through bare maple rows. On the old wooden roof of the Maddox Ranch, sunlight pooled like honey, warm, gentle, forgiving. It had been a month since Barrett Maddox opened the door of the house he thought was abandoned, and now it was no longer just an investment property. It had a new name, painted in white letters on the wooden gate. The Haven, a place to heal. Mornings at the Haven began with the smell of baking. Ruby Callahan was always the first to rise. The soft thud of kneading dough, the sound of a butter knife cutting cleanly, her quiet lullabies for baby Emma, who crawled across the kitchen floor with cheeks as pink as autumn apples. Grace Shaw, her silver hair tied neatly at the back, taught Emma her first words from a children's book. Say apple, darling. Ah, puh. Good girl. The kitchen bloomed with laughter. At the table, Violet McCall typed numbers into an old laptop, neatly clipping receipts, her focus so sharp it felt like she was back in a city accounting firm rather than a wooden house tucked in a Montana valley. And Cora Langley, the woman Barrett still couldn't fully understand, was the soul of the place. She organized planting schedules, assigned daily tasks, checked the water system, repainted the fence, and never forgot to remind Barrett to eat breakfast before heading out. What had once been a temporary shelter was slowly evolving into something else, a small self-sustaining community bound by care rather than blood. Grace opened a reading and writing class in the living room. Midday light streamed through the windows, spilling across rough wooden tables. Local women came, survivors of abuse, divorce, and layoffs, to learn how to fill out job applications, read rental agreements, or simply sign their own names for the first time. "You don't have to be perfect," Grace said, her voice calm but firm. "You just need to understand enough so no one can trick you into signing what you can't read." A young woman, hands trembling, read aloud the first line of her form. Her voice cracked, but when she finished, the room erupted in applause. Cora stood by the doorway, holding a cup of tea, her expression softening. In that moment, she understood something profound. That justice didn't only live in courtrooms. Sometimes it began right here, when people reclaimed their own voices. Barrett spent most of his days outside. He installed moisture sensors, tested the solar-powered irrigation system, and checked each photovoltaic panel, the project he called Farm Tech Renewal. Cora often brought him coffee and stood quietly for a while, watching him work beneath the spreading amber of dusk. "Do you believe land has memory?" Barrett asked one evening, without looking up from his tablet. "If it does," Cora said, "then this land is learning to trust humans again." Her answer made him stop. For a brief, wordless moment, even the wind seemed to pause between them. That evening, dinner was simple: chicken soup, bread, and fresh vegetables from their garden. Candlelight flickered across the wooden table, warming every face. Ruby told stories about Emma learning to talk. Grace read out the day's lesson from her literacy class. Violet spoke about opening a small bank account for the Haven. Cora said nothing. She just listened, smiling faintly now and then. Barrett sat at the head of the table watching them, feeling something unfamiliar, a warmth deeper than comfort, a peace he hadn't known even at the height of his success. When the conversation lulled, he set his spoon down and spoke, his voice steady. "There's something I want to say." All eyes turned to him. "You told me you'd move out this month," he continued, "but I don't want that to happen." The room fell silent. "If you're willing, I want you to stay. No time limits. The Haven doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to all of us." Ruby was the first to cry. She grabbed Grace's hand, laughing through her tears. Violet bowed her head, her voice rough. "I don't even know how to thank you, Mr. Maddox." Cora looked at him. Her eyes were soft, but a trace of worry flickered there. "Do you realize what that means? If Wickham finds out you're harboring us, you'll be in trouble." Barrett's voice was calm but firm. "I've spent half my life choosing the safe road. This time, I'll choose the right one." The candlelight quivered. Cora nodded slowly, her smile thin as mist but luminous. "Thank you, Barrett. We'll stay." No one spoke after that. They simply lifted their glasses of water and touched them together. A humble toast for a new beginning. The following days passed in rare tranquility. Violet built an electronic ledger system. Ruby began selling her pastries to a cafe in town. Grace expanded her morning class. Cora worked on legal paperwork to register the Haven as a community nonprofit. Barrett helped haul supplies, rebuilt fences, and drove Grace into town to print forms. For the first time, he felt something he'd never felt before, that he belonged somewhere. One afternoon, as he stacked bricks around the garden, Cora approached holding a mug of tea. "Aren't you afraid," she asked quietly, "of what happens if this all falls apart?" "I used to be," Barrett said, "but not anymore. If I lose everything again, at least this time I'll know what I was fighting for." She looked at him, longer than necessary. The late sun broke behind him, gilding his hair and eyes with amber light. Beneath that silence, something stirred. Not loud but warm, like fire smoldering deep in the earth. Night. The mountain breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of lavender from the porch. Ruby's lullaby for Emma floated softly through the dark. Barrett sat at his desk, sketching plans for farm tech renewal. In the next room, Cora opened her father's old notebook and wrote a line in blue ink. The truth always finds its way to light. She looked up through the open doorway. Barrett was still at work, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor, the golden lamplight brushing his shoulders like a trace of late sunlight. And in that still moment, Cora realized, in a world full of loss, some people didn't need promises. Just staying was enough. And that morning, Barrett Maddox was checking the water sensors when his phone began to vibrate nonstop. A message from an old friend in San Francisco contained only a link. Scandal. Disgraced former CEO Barrett Maddox shelters a group of women occupying the Wickham Land Group property. The screen reflected his face under the harsh sun, somber eyes, lips pressed tight. The article was long and venomous, calling him a bankrupt dreamer and accusing the Haven of being an illegal refuge for women occupying corporate land belonging to the Wickham Group. Attached were drone photos, Barrett and Cora standing together in the garden, bathed in golden evening light, as if caught in a secret. That afternoon, 2 trucks from the Bureau of Land Management stopped at the gate. Men in gray windbreakers took photos of the house, measured the fences, and posted a bright red notice. Property under administrative investigation. Inside the kitchen, Ruby clutched Emma, her eyes red and puffy. Violet tried to calm everyone while Grace silently brewed tea. Only Cora stood by the doorway, staring at the red notice, her gray eyes darkening. Barrett walked in, his shirt streaked with dust. Wickham, he said flatly, the word more a conclusion than a guess. Cora gave a slow nod. He's striking both fronts, economically through you, legally through me. I'll hire an attorney, Barrett replied. I've got all the documents proving ownership. Cora's voice was cold, steady. You think he needs evidence? He needs rumors. The story spreads, investors pull out, the county steps in, you're isolated, and I'm under surveillance. That's how he fights. Barrett was silent for a moment, then looked straight at her. Cora, I'm not going anywhere. The Haven belongs to us, and I won't let anyone burn it down, in any sense of the word. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes softening. You realize you're standing on the fire line now? He gave a faint smile. I've lived in the safest buildings in the country, he said quietly, but only here, among old wood and dirt, do I finally have something worth protecting. 2 days later, the wind in Montana turned fierce. Dark clouds gathered, signaling the first winter storm. And Barrett built an extra shelter to protect the solar panels. Cora sealed the storage room and locked away her father's hard drive. Ruby packed an emergency bag for baby Emma. Everyone felt it. Something was coming. That evening, the Haven was unusually quiet. Words seemed heavy, unnecessary. Cora sat by the window, the firelight casting a soft orange glow on her face. Calm but taut, like a drawn string. Barrett brewed coffee, trying to appear casual, though his hand trembled slightly as he handed her a cup. I'll deliver all the property papers to the county court tomorrow morning, he said. You should leave early. And you? I'll stay with them. This is where I'm meant to protect. He wanted to argue, but in the end, he just nodded. Around midnight, the wind howled through the valley. Cora woke with a start to a small popping sound outside, like a glass bottle breaking. She rushed to the window and froze. Flames were rising from the storage shed behind the barn. Fire, Barrett! Her shout cut through the house. Ruby grabbed Emma, Violet pulled Grace by the arm, and they all ran out. Barrett sprinted from the stables, fire extinguisher in hand, smoke swirling around him, his eyes blazing with determination. Cora, get them out, he shouted. She led Ruby and Grace toward the gate, clutching Emma close, then turned back just as Barrett disappeared into the inferno. The fire climbed fast, devouring the roof beams. Wood cracked and snapped. The stench of gasoline filled the air. Barrett wrapped his jacket over his shoulders and charged in again, to save the files, the hard drive, the evidence. Barrett, no, it's collapsing, Cora screamed. He turned, half his face hidden behind smoke. We can't let him win. A second later, the roof came crashing down. Cora ran forward and dragged Barrett out of the flames. They collapsed on the wet ground, gasping, choking on ash and smoke. Her lungs burned. Tears stung her eyes. They lay close, listening to each other's ragged breathing amid the hiss of burning wood and the acrid air. Barrett turned his head, his hand finding hers. Warm, trembling, real. Through the flickering light, she saw his eyes. Tired, soot-streaked, but clear and fierce. Neither spoke. Their hearts beat in sync, a silent vow amid the roaring blaze. When they looked up again, the shed was a red inferno, flames painting the hillside in furious light. And in that moment, they both knew. They would never walk alone again. By morning, fire trucks and police swarmed the ranch. Smoke still rose from the charred beams. Ruby sat clutching Emma, her face pale and sleepless. Violet spoke shakily to an officer, while Grace wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. An investigator approached, holding a plastic evidence bag. We found traces of industrial accelerant, type used only by construction firms. This compound is manufactured by a subsidiary of Wickham Land Group. Barrett stood nearby, his jacket singed, one arm hastily bandaged, his fist clenched. He said nothing. Cora looked at the bag, her eyes cold as steel. He's declared war, she murmured. And he just made his biggest mistake, Barrett replied hoarsely but steadily. Because this time, we have proof. The wind swept across the open fields, scattering gray ash into the pale morning mist. Part of the haven was gone, burned to rubble. But through the ruins, the first winter sunlight broke across what remained of the house. The light was faint but enduring, like an unspoken vow between them. If Wickham wanted fire, they would answer with truth. And the real war began that night. 2 days after the fire, the Montana Valley still smelled of smoke and ash. Barrett and Violet rebuilt the barn's frame, while Ruby tended to baby Emma in the only room left untouched. That morning, Cora stood beside the pickup truck, her suitcase loaded in the back. The early wind swept loose strands of hair across her face. Her eyes steady, her expression calm yet resolute. Washington, D.C. isn't Montana, Barrett said, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. You're sure you want to go alone? I have to, she replied, voice low but firm. The FBI won't act on phone calls. They need the original files in hand. Grace, standing nearby with an old scarf wrapped around her shoulders, nodded. I'll go with her. You stay here and take care of everyone. The haven still needs a man who knows how to fix a roof. Barrett gave a faint smile, though his eyes betrayed worry. He bent down, taking Cora's hand, the first time he hadn't hesitated to do so. Be careful, Cora. Wickham has eyes everywhere. I know, she said quietly, but this time, I'm not running. The truck rolled away, kicking up a thin cloud of dust, leaving Barrett standing alone in the field, watching until the last glint of sunlight faded down the dirt road. Washington, D.C., 3 days later. The city sky looked nothing like Montana's. It was crowded, gray, suffocating, cold in the way power always is. Cora wore a long coat, clutching a canvas bag that held her father's hard drive and files. Grace walked beside her, their worn shoes echoing across the marble hallway of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They were greeted by Agent Ray Torres, about 40, tall, sharp-eyed, but quietly attentive. Cora placed the files on his desk. These are the originals. Backups from a 2015 server, proof that Wickham Land Group used fake contracts to seize public land. My father, Judge Samuel Langley, died right after filing for an internal investigation. Torres flipped through the pages, brows furrowing. Then he looked up. You understand that what you're submitting could shake the entire Montana state system? If justice has to shake, Cora said steadily, then let it shake. Grace rested a reassuring hand on Cora's shoulder, though her own eyes glimmered with conviction. Torres nodded, signing the receipt. The FBI will reopen the Langley case. Miss Langley, thank you for keeping these safe all these years. Cora offered a faint, tired smile. I'm just finishing what my father couldn't. Meanwhile, back in Montana, Barrett faced a different battle. 2 reporters and 3 federal inspectors arrived at the haven the same morning, firing questions rapid fire. Did you know those women were illegally occupying government property? Is the Haven a disguised front for an unregistered organization? Barrett's reply never changed. No, they're people I trust, and this is our home. That evening, as he cleared debris from the burned storage shed, a sleek black SUV stopped at the gate. From it stepped Harold Wickham. The car's headlights cut across his face, half in light, half shadow. "You're playing a dangerous game, Maddox," Wickham said, his tone smooth as a blade. "You were a CEO once. You know what the media can do to a name." Barrett wiped his hands on his jeans and stood tall. "If you came to scare me, you're wasting your breath." Wickham chuckled. "Oh, really? What about this ranch? Those people? I could have the county repossess this land in a week." "No, you can't," Barrett said evenly, "because you don't own it anymore. The FBI is investigating your case." For the first time, Wickham froze, his smile stiffening into something brittle. "You have no idea whose grave you're digging, Maddox." "You're right," Barrett replied, his eyes bright. "I'm not digging anyone's grave." "You did that yourself." Wickham stared at him, silent. Then he turned to leave. Before stepping into his car, he murmured, almost to the wind, "I've seen plenty of men who thought they were heroes. They all end the same way, in ashes." The car disappeared into the dark, leaving Barrett standing alone in the cold, endless field. 3 days later, a short headline appeared on the front page of a national newspaper. "FBI reopens Wickham Land Group fraud case. New evidence emerges after nearly a decade." The article didn't name the source, but Barrett knew exactly who was behind it. He held the newspaper, the morning light catching the print, a flicker of pride and worry crossing his face. That evening, he called Cora. "The news is out. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said. "But the FBI needs me in D.C. for a few more days. They're verifying the data and taking my statement." "Be careful with anyone who gets close to you," Barrett warned, his voice low. "Wickham won't stay quiet." There was a pause before she replied, calm and certain. "I know, but this time we have light, and all he has left is darkness." Night settled gently over Montana. The wind hummed through the new roof, carrying traces of soot still buried in the soil. Violet closed her ledger. Ruby sang softly as she rocked Emma to sleep. Barrett stepped out onto the porch, looking toward the open valley, the moonlight stretching over the fields like silver water. He remembered Cora's words before she left. "Don't let the Haven stay just a refuge. Make it a beginning." And in the darkness, he saw it. A faint glow from the lantern on the hill, small but unwavering, like a promise carried across miles. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, they weren't hiding in the dark anymore. They were using it to light the path for justice to walk through. Federal Court, Washington, D.C., a cold, silent morning. From the outside, the marble courthouse looked like a massive block of ice in the middle of the city. Inside, the air was taut as a wire. Cameras, reporters, and microphones crowded the entrance. The name Harold Wickham, once a symbol of Western real estate power, was now at the center of a nationwide scandal. The Langley case, buried for nearly a decade, was finally being reopened. Cora sat in the front row between Barrett and Grace. The light gray suit made her look like someone else, composed, sharp, but her gray eyes still carried the quiet ache of loss. On the attorney's table lay the black hard drive, sealed with FBI tape, next to the original files she had brought from Montana. Special Agent Ray Torres, head of the investigation, addressed the court. "Your Honor, this is Exhibit 17, files extracted from the hard drive belonging to Judge Samuel Langley, dated 2015. The data shows that Mr. Harold Wickham and his associates used forged contracts to seize nearly 12,000 acres of federal land, later reselling it to the government at 10 times the price." The screen lit up with digital documents, fake signatures, overlapping land maps, and a list of officials who had accepted bribes. Torres continued, voice steady but firm. "We also found evidence linking Judge Langley's death to this investigation. Before his death, he had filed a request for a federal inquiry. 3 days later, his car exploded. Local police ruled it a brake malfunction, but forensic analysis now proves the braking system was deliberately tampered with." The courtroom fell so silent that the sound of a pen dropping echoed like thunder. When it was time for witness testimony, Cora stood. The spotlight caught her face gently. "My name is Cora Langley, daughter of Judge Samuel Langley." "Miss Langley," the prosecutor asked, "do you know who benefited most from your father's death?" "Harold Wickham," she said without hesitation. "My father discovered that he was illegally acquiring federal land. He planned to submit the evidence to federal authorities. I don't believe my father's death was an accident." Behind her, Barrett clenched his fists. He knew her calm voice was only a mask. Every word she spoke carried a wound that still bled. Wickham's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. Cora opened her laptop and displayed an email, her father's final, never-before-seen message. "If I disappear, look inside my personal server. Justice may be delayed, but it will come." A ripple of whispers swept through the courtroom. At the defense table, Harold Wickham sat upright, his face pale, his eyes calculating. When his turn came to speak, his voice was low and gravelly. "I didn't kill anyone. I'm a businessman. Those signatures aren't mine." The prosecutor projected a close-up image. Wickham's forged signature on the fake contract, side by side with his official authorization form. On the screen, digital analysis confirmed a 99.3% match. The crowd murmured again. The judge struck the gavel. "Order in the court." During recess, Barrett found Cora standing in the hallway. "You did great," he said quietly. "My father used to tell me, if justice has no voice, you must be the one to speak for it." He looked at her, eyes softening. "You didn't just speak. You made it heard." Cora smiled faintly, exhausted but lighter. For the first time, she felt the darkness around her beginning to lift. 3 days later, the court issued its preliminary ruling. Harold Wickham was indicted on 3 federal charges: fraud, bribery, and obstruction of justice, leading to the death of Judge Samuel Langley. The court ordered a full freeze of all Wickham Land Group assets and launched further investigations into the involved officials. Meanwhile, authorities temporarily froze Madison Plot 302, the property where the Haven stood, to verify ownership. Barrett immediately submitted every deed, transaction record, and tax certificate to the FBI, proving he was a legitimate buyer, unaware of Wickham's crimes. A week later, when the final ruling was read aloud, the judge's voice carried through the chamber. "Given that Mr. Barrett Maddox is a bona fide purchaser, has fully cooperated with the investigation, and that his property served as key evidence, exposing the crimes of Wickham Land Group, the court hereby restores full legal ownership of Madison Plot 302 to Mr. Barrett Maddox." Cora grasped his hand tightly. They didn't speak, just looked at each other, eyes glistening, but bright with the clarity of sunlight breaking through gray clouds. Headlines spread across the nation. "The woman from Montana who brought justice back to Washington." That afternoon, Cora stepped out of the courthouse. A soft rain had begun to fall, the first of the season, light and cleansing. Barrett waited on the steps, holding 2 cups of coffee. She looked at him, her expression gentler beneath the rain. "We haven't won yet, Barrett." "I know," he said, smiling. "But today, justice found its voice again. And it carries the name Langley." Cora turned toward the towering white courthouse. The rain faded, and for the first time in years, she felt her father could finally rest. And the shadows of the past had been brought into the light, and the Haven, once burned to ashes, was waiting for a new beginning. Spring returned to the Montana Valley. The last traces of snow melted under the sun, revealing fields of tender green stretching like a living carpet. Where there had once been ashes, now rang the sounds of hammers, saws, and laughter. Barrett stood in the middle of the construction site, sleeves rolled up, blueprint in hand. The lines of a dream rebuilt. The main house of the Haven was rising again, crafted from white pine, framed with fire-resistant steel, and powered by solar panels gleaming on the roof. Behind it stood a new workshop, where the women learned crafts, baking, and organic farming. Next to the old wooden sign, a new one had been planted, silver letters engraved, "The Second Chance Foundation," founded by Barrett Maddox and Cora Langley. On the morning of the grand opening, the breeze drifted gently through the young maple trees. On the porch, Ruby held baby Emma, dressed in a bright yellow dress, while Violet arranged registration forms for new trainees. Grace spoke with a small group of women, faces once marked by fear now radiant with renewal. Cora stepped out of the new house wearing a cream dress, her hair tied low, her smile peaceful in a way Barrett had rarely seen. He was adjusting the microphone cable on the small stage when his eyes found her, and for a heartbeat the world's noise faded away. "We both lost everything once," he said softly as people began to gather. "But you didn't give up," she replied, her smile glinting like sunlight on snow. "No," he said, glancing around, "because you didn't let me." The ceremony began. Locals, reporters, and even FBI representatives filled the courtyard. From afar, Agent Ray Torres nodded politely at Cora. The newspapers had called her the woman who brought new life to Montana's valley. But she only smiled. She didn't need titles, only the sight of this place alive again. Barrett stepped up to the podium, his voice deep, carrying through the speakers. "A year ago, this land was nothing but ashes. Today it stands as a symbol of what we call a second chance, not just for me, but for anyone who ever thought they couldn't start over." He paused, his gaze finding hers. "And the first person who taught me what that means is standing right over there." Cora blinked, startled as dozens of faces turned toward her. Barrett stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. The wind stilled, as if the entire valley held its breath. He knelt, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. No grand gesture, no music, just a quiet smile, the kind of smile born from fire and still choosing love. "You came here searching for justice," he said, voice rough with emotion. "But you built something greater, a place where people learn to live again." Cora covered her mouth, tears bright in her eyes. "Are you sure? A lawyer might call that a lifelong vow. Then let's call it a lifetime contract." Laughter and applause erupted through the garden. Ruby lifted Emma high. Grace wiped her eyes and Violet tossed lavender petals into the air. Cora nodded, placing her hand in his. "I say yes." Evening fell. The guests departed, leaving behind the soft glow of sunset over the new roofs, the windows alive with light. Cora and Barrett sat on the porch, cold coffee forgotten on the table, the valley before them stretching wide and green. A dream made real. "Do you think my father would be proud?" she asked quietly. "I'm sure he's smiling," Barrett said, "because his daughter didn't just bring justice. She brought hope." Cora leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the lamplight shimmer on the small pond before the porch. "And you, Barrett Maddox? Did you find what you were looking for?" "I did," he said softly. "A home, and the person who made it one." The spring wind swept past, carrying the scent of lavender and wet soil. In the heart of Montana, the Second Chance Foundation glowed like a newly lit heart, a place where the broken found faith again, where justice met compassion, and where two souls who had walked through darkness finally found each other in the light of a new dawn. 1 year later, dawn rose over the Montana Valley, spilling honey gold light across the fields. The first rays slipped through the maple trees, gliding over the new wooden roof, the freshly painted white fences, and the carved sign that read, "The Second Chance Ranch, where hope comes home." The wind carried the scent of freshly brewed coffee and children's laughter. What had once been the haven was now Second Chance Ranch, a small but thriving community where those who had fallen once found the courage to rise again. In a sun-filled room, Cora was teaching a group of children to read comic books. Her hair was tied high, a few strands falling loose as she leaned over the pages. The children, most of them the sons and daughters of the women she had helped, giggled every time she changed her voice for a character. Cora laughed too, one hand unconsciously resting on her belly, where a small life was growing, steady and strong. Across the ranch, Ruby opened the door to her new bakery, Emma's Hearth. The smell of fresh bread drifted down the dirt road, so irresistible that even the ranch dogs lay at the doorstep, waiting for crumbs. Emma, now 4 years old, wore a tiny chef's hat, proudly stirring the dough beside her mother. "When I grow up, I'll teach other people to bake," she said. Ruby smiled and wiped flour from her daughter's cheek. "And I'll be your first customer." By the garden behind the house, Grace bent over rows of lavender and rosemary. Her herb garden had become the main supplier for the nearby cafes, but more importantly, it was a place where she taught new arrivals how to find peace in careful work and the fragrance of the earth. "Every plant needs time to take root," she told a young woman recently freed from an abusive marriage. just like we do. And Violet, the woman who once lost everything after her husband's downfall, was now the financial director of the foundation. She sat in her small wooden office, surrounded by grant forms and planning boards. When asked how she managed to run a rescue center in such a remote valley, she simply smiled and said, "We don't run this place on money. We run it on trust." That afternoon, Barrett Maddox stood outside the stables, sleeves rolled up, sun darkening his skin. The years had changed him. His shirt was faded, his hands rough, but in his eyes still glimmered the same light that once led a multi-million-dollar company. Only now, instead of mergers and contracts, he spoke about farm tech renewal, the solar-powered agricultural system he was developing with local universities. Cora walked up carrying 2 mugs of herbal tea. "I just finished the reading class," she said softly. "The kids can read the sign at the gate now." "What sign?" he asked, pretending not to know. "The one that says, 'Where hope comes home.'" Barrett chuckled. "I still remember the day we stood in the ashes, not believing we'd ever see this." "And I," Cora replied, "remember thinking that if a burned house can be rebuilt, so can a human heart." On the front porch, a long table was set, Ruby's bread, Grace's tea, and lavender from the garden. The community gathered not for any occasion, but simply to share dinner under the pale gold sunset. Violet raised her glass. "1 year, and Second Chance Ranch still stands. We've turned pain into a home," Ruby added with a grin, "and ashes into pastries." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cora looked around. The same faces that once carried despair now glowed in the evening light. Emma sat on Barrett's shoulders, laughing uncontrollably. Cora touched her belly gently, feeling the tiny heartbeat within sync with the joy around her. "Do you think our child will grow up here?" she asked quietly. Barrett gazed toward the fields where the sun was dipping behind the distant ridge. "Yes," he said, "here, where they'll learn that hope isn't a luxury. It's something you plant in the ground every day." When night fell, the Montana sky shimmered with 1,000 stars. Light spilled gently from the main house, a house that once burned to the ground, now glowing as a monument to resilience. Barrett rested a hand on Cora's shoulder. "I remember the day you told me you came here searching for justice," he murmured. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I think you found more than that," he said. "You turned justice into a home." Cora smiled. In her eyes, the next morning's dawn already shimmered. The horses snorted quietly in the barn, and the lavender scent drifted through the cool air, their breaths mingling in the warmth of the night. Outside, the wind brushed against the wooden sign, making its silver letters tremble gently beneath the moonlight. The Second Chance Ranch, where hope comes home. When morning came, golden light swept across the fields, illuminating every smile, every scar, every mark of pain and rebirth. And in that light, Cora Langley knew her quest for justice had become something greater, a story of faith, compassion, and new beginnings.